The moment Dr. Arthur Miller's hand lingered on Sarah's lower back, a slow, possessive slide as she laughed with a donor, a tremor went through me. He then pulled her closer, whispering something that made her blush and glance at me, a quick flicker of shame. His smile, though, remained pasted on his face as he raised his glass, clinking it against mine, with a cold, knowing glint in his eyes that promised trouble. My life with Sarah had been a precisely arranged set of expectations, a calendar of successes. Our house in the older part of town, with its wide porch and mature oaks, felt like a testament to careful planning. My work as a corporate attorney gave me a sense of order, a defined path through complex arrangements. Sarah, a brilliant surgeon, moved through her world with similar precision, her mind sharp, her hands steady. For years, the hum of our existence had been a steady, reassuring note. But lately, a faint dissonance had begun to creep in, a barely perceptible shift in the rhythm. It felt like a subtle change in pressure, the kind you notice just before a storm breaks. She came home that Tuesday evening later than usual, the house already quiet. I was in the study, reviewing some contracts, the lamplight casting long shadows across the legal pads. The click of her heels on the hardwood floor was familiar, yet something felt different. She walked into the room, her surgical scrubs exchanged for a silk blouse and dark trousers, a faint smile playing on her lips. Her eyes, though, held a distant quality, like she was looking at something beyond the walls. Then I saw it, a glint at her wrist, catching the low light, a bracelet, thin and elegant, with a distinctive interlocking C's I recognized immediately. Cartier. It sat there, a silent, glittering object against the pale skin of her wrist. My stomach tightened. "That's new," I said, my voice flatter than I intended. I tried to sound casual, but the words felt brittle. Sarah glanced down at her wrist, a brief, almost shy movement. "Oh, this? Arthur gave it to me." She gestured vaguely. "For the gala. You know, organizing everything." My gaze remained fixed on the bracelet. "That's what, 6 grand, 7 for doing your job." I kept my tone level, but the question was a cold blade. It wasn't a casual piece, it was a statement. She looked up, finally meeting my eyes, then quickly averted hers to a spot on the wall behind me. Her smile stretched a fraction too wide, a little stiff around the edges. "He gives gifts to everyone on the team, Mike. It's just how he shows his appreciation." Her voice had an edge, a rehearsed lilt. "You know how generous Arthur is. He values hard work." The explanation felt thin, like gauze over a wound. Dr. Arthur Miller was a prominent figure, a successful surgeon who ran the hospital's most lucrative department. He was known for his philanthropy, yes, but also for a certain possessiveness, a need to control the orbit around him. I leaned forward slightly. "Does it have an inscription?" Sarah's hand flew to her wrist, covering the bracelet. It was a quick, almost involuntary motion. "Just his initials, really," she mumbled, looking down at her shoes. "And a date, for tax purposes, you know." Her fingers fiddled with the clasp, a nervous habit I hadn't seen in years. Later that evening, while she thought I was asleep, I heard the faint clinking sound from her dressing table. The next morning, I found the bracelet buried deep in her jewelry box, nestled under a tangle of old costume pieces she hadn't worn since college. Cheap glass beads and tarnished silver. It was a clear warning sign, a quiet alarm ringing in the silence of our bedroom. The Cartier bracelet was the first, but not the last. A week later, a small blue box from Tiffany's appeared, containing a delicate pair of diamond stud earrings. Then came the designer handbag, a smooth leather piece in a color she usually wouldn't pick, a gift certificate for a full spa day, a bottle of expensive, heady perfume, its scent too strong for her usual subtle taste. Each item appeared with a new, increasingly convoluted explanation. "Arthur's celebrating the new wing," she'd say, placing the handbag on the kitchen counter, its pristine leather an anomaly next to our worn toaster. "He's just grateful for everyone's efforts." Her voice would be a little too bright, a little too insistent. Her hands began to tremble more often, her movements growing hesitant. One evening, I watched her clutch an antique silver compact, her knuckles white, as she repeated, "It's just how he shows appreciation." Her eyes, once so direct, now darted around, unable to settle. I watched her for days, the quiet tension building between us, an unspoken current. One Saturday morning, after breakfast, I finally put down my coffee cup. "What's really going on, Sarah?" I asked, my voice low, steady. "Talk to me." She flinched, her spoon clattering against the ceramic bowl, a sharp intake of breath, then a sudden, almost violent snap. "Nothing's going on, Mike. Why do you keep asking?" "I'm just stressed. It's the hospital board review next month, and Arthur's been on edge." Her voice cracked on the last words, and the anger drained from her face, replaced by a profound weariness. She looked small suddenly, hunched over the kitchen table. I reached across and took her hands. They were cold, trembling slightly in mine. "Whatever's happening, Sarah," I said, my voice soft, "we face it together." She leaned into me across the table, her head resting on my shoulder for a moment, the silk of her blouse cool against my cheek. "I'm so tired, Mike," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I woke up to the silence of the room, a different kind of quiet than the one I usually slept in. The digital clock on the bedside table glowed 3:00 a.m. Sarah's side of the bed was empty, the sheets cool where her body should have been. A familiar knot tightened in my gut. This wasn't the first time. I got up, the floorboards cold under my bare feet, and walked through the silent house. No light in the living room, no sound from her study. I found her in the kitchen, a solitary figure silhouetted against the tall window. She was gripping one of my whiskey tumblers, half full, her gaze fixed on the distant shimmer of the city lights. The hospital tower, a dark obelisk against the bruised pre-dawn sky. I slid onto the stool beside her. The scent of bourbon hung faintly in the air. "Bad dream?" I asked, keeping my voice low, just above a whisper. She flinched, a small, involuntary jump, as if she hadn't known I was there. Her grip on the glass tightened. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she lifted the tumbler to her lips and took a long, slow swallow, the amber liquid glinting in the faint light. "Do you ever wonder," she said, her voice raspy, "if we are stuck? If this is all there is?" She wasn't looking at me. Her eyes remained fixed on the city, her arm lifted slightly, a vague gesture towards the direction of the hospital. "Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning, and no one can see it." The words hung in the quiet kitchen, heavy and cold. This was more than just Miller. This was something deeper, a weariness I hadn't truly acknowledged. I reached across and covered her hand, my palm warm against her cool skin. "Sarah," I said, my voice firmer now, drawing her back. "What's really going on with Miller?" Her eyes, when she finally turned them to me, were wide and glistening. Tears began to well, tracing slow paths down her cheeks. "Nothing, I swear," she whispered, her voice catching. "He's just attentive. He notices things, compliments, small touches. A hand on my shoulder after a particularly long surgery. A quick squeeze of the arm when a new project lands." She pulled her hand from mine, turning the glass slowly. Her voice dropped, barely audible. "The way he looks at me sometimes, though, like he's calculating something." A sudden chill, colder than the morning air, spread through my veins. "Has he tried anything?" I asked, my voice tight. "Touched you inappropriately?" "God, no," she said too quickly, too emphatically. She shook her head, a violent tremor passing through her. "Arthur's married, to Martha Miller, for God's sake. She's practically on every charity board in the state." She took another gulp of whiskey. "He hasn't tried anything I couldn't handle." She dismissed it with a wave of her hand, a practiced indifference. "It's an occupational hazard, Mike. Handsy surgeons. Some of them just think they own the place, the people." I wanted to tell her she shouldn't have to handle anything, that no one should have to, but she cut me off, her jaw set. "Please," she said, looking straight at me now, her eyes red-rimmed but defiant. "I've got everything under control." The tremor in her hand, as she set the empty glass down on the granite counter, betrayed her. It rattled softly, a small, desperate sound in the stillness. The next morning, the lingering smell of whiskey was a ghost in the kitchen. I called my old college roommate, Scott Jenkins, a resident at St. Jude's, the same hospital where Sarah worked. He answered on the third ring, his voice still thick with sleep. "Scott," I said, trying to keep my voice even, "it's Mike. I need to ask you about something." I got straight to it, asking about Dr. Arthur Miller. Scott paused on the other end, a moment of consideration. "Miller, he finally said. "Brilliant doctor, absolutely. Best hands in the department. A complete perfectionist. He cleared his throat. But yeah, there are rumors. My knuckles whitened, gripping the phone. What kind of rumors? The words felt like sandpaper in my throat. Scott sighed, a low sound. He has a type, Mike, always has. Smart, attractive women, usually in some kind of subordinate position. Nurses, residents, administrative staff. He's good at making them feel like they're special, indispensable, and then when things get messy, they just disappear. He paused again. Remember Connie, the nurse practitioner from a couple of years ago? She transferred suddenly. Rumor was she filed an HR complaint. Unconfirmed, of course. Everything always is with Arthur. The image of Sarah, whiskey glass in hand, staring out at the city lights, became a recurring loop in my mind. All weekend I sat in my study, the glow of my computer screen reflecting my own grim face, pretending to work, but really just battling a rising tide of paranoia. Scott's words about Miller, about rumors, and his type, gnawed at me. The silence in the house, a silence that once felt like peace, now felt like a shroud. The weight of it grew heavier with each passing hour. I couldn't focus on legal briefs. My mind kept drifting to Sarah's pale face, her whispered, "I'm so tired." I knew we needed to get away, to reconnect, to try and find the people we used to be. "Let's drive down to Big Sur," I said suddenly on Sunday afternoon, walking into the living room where she was half-heartedly flipping through a magazine. "Just for a couple of days, like old times." She looked up, startled, then a slow smile spread across her face, a fragile thing that transformed her features. "Really, she asked, her voice tinged with a hope I hadn't heard in weeks. Her gratitude was almost pathetic, a desperate need for escape. The drive down Highway 1 was a balm. The Pacific Ocean, vast and indifferent, stretched out to our left, cliffs dropping dramatically to meet the restless waves, the familiar turns, the scent of salt and eucalyptus, the sun glinting off the water. It all worked its quiet magic. I watched Sarah relax in the passenger seat, her shoulders dropping, the tension in her jaw easing. Her hand resting on the console between us seemed less clenched. We checked into our favorite inn, a small place tucked into the hillside with a view of the crashing surf. We even managed to get the same room we had for our honeymoon. The familiarity was comforting, a thin thread back to a time before anything had started to unravel. Sarah walked onto the small balcony, looking out at the endless blue. "Remember our honeymoon?" she asked, a genuine laugh bubbling up, a sound I hadn't realized how much I'd missed. "It rained the whole time, and we never left the room anyway. Best rainstorm ever." For a fleeting moment, she was just Sarah again. Not Dr. Sarah Peterson, chief of surgery at St. Jude's, but Sarah, my wife, with the crinkle at the corner of her eyes when she smiled. And I was just Mike before Miller, before the expensive gifts and the whispered fears and the knot in my stomach. We spent the days hiking the winding trails, the air crisp and clean. We ate fresh seafood at a shack overlooking the water, the kind of place where the paper napkins got soaked with condensation from the beer glasses. We drank too much local wine and watched the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, the kind of vibrant display that only the Pacific Coast could deliver. We talked about nothing important, just the easy rhythm of a shared life. That night after dinner, we were sitting on the balcony again, the moon a sliver above the dark ocean. The sound of the waves crashing against the rocks below was a constant, soothing rhythm. I knew I couldn't let the moment pass, that the fragile peace wouldn't hold indefinitely. This was my chance. I took a deep breath. "Sarah," I said, my voice low, cutting through the night air, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me, completely honest." She stiffened beside me, the subtle shift in her posture noticeable even in the dark. She didn't turn to me, but I felt her nod. "Are you afraid of Arthur Miller?" The silence that followed stretched, filled only by the roar of the ocean. It was a long silence, pregnant with unspoken things. I watched her profile, rigid and unmoving. Then so softly I almost didn't hear it over the waves, she whispered, "Yes." The word was a tiny, sharp shard of ice in my blood. My worst fears, unspoken and unconfirmed, solidified into a brutal reality. Has he threatened you? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, the cold in my veins spreading. She finally turned to me, her face pale in the faint moonlight. Not explicitly. He's too smart for that. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if suddenly chilled, though the night air was mild. It's more implied. He'll mention how he's made or broken careers in the medical community, how he has connections everywhere, on hospital boards, with donors, with pharmaceutical reps. He just reminds me of his reach. That sounds like a threat to me, I said, the words flat. She shrugged, a helpless, desperate gesture. Maybe, but what can I do, Mike? Quit? In this job market, with our mortgage? He'd make sure I couldn't get hired anywhere decent. He'd make a few calls, drop a few words, and my career would be over before it began. She let out a short, bitter laugh, a hollow sound that carried on the wind. File a complaint? Against Arthur Miller? He'd bury me. He's got the power, Mike. Everyone knows it. The yes still echoed in my ears, even after we'd left Big Sur and returned to the quiet tension of our house. Sarah's fear, palpable and real, was a constant undercurrent, but something else had settled in me. A grim determination. If she was afraid, and if she felt trapped, then I had to understand the dimensions of that trap. I started digging, quietly, systematically, like an attorney preparing a case, sifting through the details of our daily lives for unseen evidence. The inconsistencies were small at first. A changed detail about a meeting, a slightly different time for a hospital event. Nothing major enough to flag in isolation, but strung together, they formed a loose thread. Then there was her phone, always in her hand, always face down when I was near. I'd catch her thumb flying across the screen, deleting messages, a furtive, almost subconscious gesture after she'd read something. My suspicion, a quiet viper, began to coil tighter in my chest. One Tuesday, she came home well past midnight. Her excuse was a late-night emergency surgery, which wasn't unusual for her line of work. But as she leaned in to kiss my cheek, I caught a faint, unfamiliar scent. Not hers, certainly not mine. A light, almost citrusy cologne clinging to her hair. My gut clenched, a cold, hard knot. That night, lying awake long after she'd fallen into a restless sleep, I knew what I had to do. It was a violation, an act I never thought I'd be capable of. But the fear had sharpened into something desperate. The next day, under the guise of fixing her slow computer, I installed monitoring software on her work laptop. It was a small, insidious program designed to record keystrokes and capture screen activity. A digital ghost in her machine. The data started trickling in, a slow, agonizing drip. At first, it was just professional emails, schedules, patient notes. Then late one night, a new folder appeared. Encrypted messages. My hands trembled as I unlocked them. The messages were a slow burn. Between Sarah and Dr. Miller, they started subtly, a compliment here, an encouraging word there, but soon the tone shifted, from professional to intensely personal. References to our secret, to shared moments, after hours, to the understanding they had that no one else could grasp. There were veiled hints about specific dates, about a hotel room, about a quiet drink that stretched into dawn. I can't stop thinking about you, one message from Miller read. Our time together means everything. And Sarah's reply, me too. It's exhilarating and terrifying all at once. I felt a profound nausea, a visceral sickness that twisted my stomach. It wasn't just fear, was it, Sarah? I whispered to myself, staring at the screen in the darkened study. My perfect life, my carefully constructed world, was disintegrating before my eyes, pixel by pixel. Then I found it. A confirmation email, buried deep in a deleted folder, recovered by the software. A hotel reservation under Dr. Miller's name for a suite. The dates matched a medical conference Sarah had attended out of town just a few weeks prior. My breath hitched. There was no longer any room for doubt, no space for interpretation. The truth, raw and brutal, crashed over me with the force of a physical blow. It was an affair, not just harassment, not just manipulation, an affair. The cold realism I usually embraced in my work now turned on me, dissecting my own life with surgical precision. I confronted her that evening. The evidence laid out on the kitchen counter, printouts of emails, the hotel reservation. She walked in, saw the papers, and her face drained of all color. Her eyes, usually so vibrant, became dull, vacant. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. She broke down completely, a torrent of shame and tears. She slid to the floor, head in her hands, her body shaking with convulsive sobs. He, he made me feel special, Mike, she choked out between gasps. He said he saw my potential, said you didn't understand my ambition. The words were like sharp fragments of glass, each one cutting deeper. He was always there, always listening. He made me feel important. She confessed to the slow, insidious emotional manipulation, how his words had twisted her perceptions, how his attention had felt like warmth in the cold, competitive world of medicine, how it had slowly, almost imperceptibly, turned physical. She admitted her own vulnerability, her misguided ambition that had blinded her, made her believe the lies. A cold, consuming rage began to simmer beneath the surface of my skin, mingling with an unbearable ache that settled deep in my chest. It felt like my heart was being squeezed in a vice. How could you, Sarah? I asked, my voice raw, barely a whisper. How could you do this to us? My world, once so ordered, had shrunk to a single burning need: confrontation. After Sarah's confession, the air in our house became thick and suffocating. Her tears, her pleas for understanding, they meant little to me in the face of the stark betrayal. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw a stranger. I told her, my voice devoid of emotion, that she had to end it with Miller. Now or I would. She agreed, of course, her voice trembling. She promised to do it, to sever ties, but I saw the hesitation in her eyes, the familiar fear that had drawn her into Miller's orbit in the first place. She tried to delay, to find the right time. I couldn't wait. The betrayal burned too hot. The drive to St. Jude's Hospital was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, a cold, focused fury propelling me forward. I parked illegally, half on the curb, and walked with a steady stride past the main entrance, straight to the executive offices. I knew the layout from years of attending charity galas with Sarah. I bypassed the receptionist, my gaze fixed on Miller's door, and pushed it open without knocking. Dr. Arthur Miller sat behind his expansive mahogany desk, bathed in the soft glow of a desk lamp, reviewing some charts. The room smelled faintly of expensive leather and polished wood, a scent of quiet power. He looked up, his expression initially one of mild annoyance, then shifting to a slow, patronizing smile as he recognized me. "Mr. Peterson," he said, his voice smooth, controlled. "He didn't invite me to sit. I believe you're overstepping." His eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, now held a glint of disdain, a subtle dismissal. I walked to his desk, my feet making no sound on the thick carpet. I pulled the crumpled printouts from my jacket pocket, the emails, the hotel reservation, and threw them onto his polished surface. They scattered like fallen leaves. "Overstepping?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "You slept with my wife." His composure faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, quickly masked by practiced indifference. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, pushing the papers away with a manicured hand. "These are baseless accusations." "Baseless?" My voice rose, cracking. "Don't pretend, Miller. We both know what these mean." The air crackled between us. The anger held so tightly within me began to boil over. He stood up slowly, a calculated movement, trying to assert dominance. "You need to leave, Mr. Peterson," he said, his voice harder now, a barely contained threat. "Before I call security." "Oh, call them back," I snarled. "Call them after I tell them exactly what kind of man you are." I leaned over the desk, my hands clenching. He took a step back, a subtle flinch, and in that moment, something inside me snapped. A raw, primal instinct took over. I shoved him. Hard. He stumbled back against a large credenza, sending a stack of medical journals toppling. A delicate ceramic vase, filled with an arrangement of white lilies, teetered precariously, then crashed to the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. The crash was a deafening punctuation mark to the escalating violence. I lunged forward, grabbing the lapels of his expensive suit jacket. He let out a surprised grunt, trying to push me away, his face twisting in a mix of shock and fear. We wrestled, a brief, clumsy struggle of two men, one fueled by betrayal, the other by wounded ego. Papers flew from his desk. The ornate desk lamp wobbled. Before it could truly escalate, the door burst open. Two burly hospital security guards, alerted by the noise, rushed in. They moved quickly, efficiently, pulling me off Miller, their hands firm on my arms. I struggled against their grip, my mind a blur of anger and despair. But they were stronger. They escorted me out of the building, past curious glances from staff, out into the bright afternoon sun. My professional reputation, everything I had carefully built, was torched, consumed in a matter of minutes. But I didn't care. Not then. The only thing that mattered was the hollow ache in my chest. The immediate fallout was swift. Security filed a report, and I was told a restraining order would be sought against me. I called my office, leaving a terse message for my managing partner, knowing my career at the firm was likely over. Sarah was distraught, a frantic voice on the phone, caught between the ruins of her marriage and a boss who would now undoubtedly view her as a volatile liability. Miller, I knew, would already be spinning the narrative, painting me as an unstable, jealous husband, making sure his own transgressions were buried beneath my outburst. I returned home to a shattered silence, the air thick with unspoken accusations. The vase Sarah loved, the one that matched our wedding china, lay broken on the floor. Our life, too, was in pieces. "What have you done, Mike?" Sarah whispered, her face streaked with fresh tears as I walked in. But it wasn't just for me or for us. It was for her future, a future I had just irrevocably altered. You might wonder how a single desperate act can unravel a lifetime. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The fallout from my confrontation with Dr. Miller was immediate and brutal. The next morning, a call from my firm's managing partner confirmed my suspension. "Unprofessional conduct," he'd stated, his voice tight with disappointment. "And the pending legal issues, it's a liability, Mike." My career, once a source of pride, now lay in tatters, a self-inflicted wound. But the anger still burned, a cold, steady flame that sharpened my resolve. I wouldn't let Miller get away with it. I turned my focus from my own ruined career to building a case against Miller. I began gathering every piece of digital evidence I had, every email, every recovered message, preparing it as if for trial. I contacted an old colleague, a sharp litigator specializing in workplace misconduct, and laid out the facts. The cost would be astronomical, but I didn't care. The only path forward was through. Sarah, however, was a different story. The exposure of her affair had ripped through her professional life like a wildfire. She was reeling, a ghost in our once vibrant home. Initially, she was hesitant, even resistant to my legal fight. "Mike, please," she'd begged, her voice hoarse from crying. "It's over. Just let it go. We can't survive this. My career is already everything." She feared complete and utter professional ruin, something she'd worked her entire life to avoid. Her ambition, once a strength, was now a raw, exposed nerve. Miller's response was swift and brutal, a calculated counterattack from a man accustomed to getting his way. His powerful legal team filed a restraining order against me, citing my unprovoked assault and harassment. They also threatened a defamation suit, a carefully worded letter arriving at my door the day after my suspension. The hospital administration, predictably, stood firmly behind their star surgeon, issuing a bland statement about supporting their staff against unfounded personal attacks and maintaining a respectful work environment. It was all a whitewash, a shield to protect their reputation and their most lucrative asset. I knew I couldn't fight Miller and the hospital's PR machine quietly. This wasn't just about Sarah anymore. This was about a pattern, about power, and about accountability. I called an investigative journalist I knew, a dogged reporter from the local paper, and laid out the story. "This isn't just about my wife," I told her, my voice steady. "It's about a pattern of abuse. He targets smart, ambitious women, uses his power, and then disposes of them. I handed her the printouts, the evidence, and the name of Connie, the nurse practitioner Scott had mentioned. The story broke 2 days later, splashed across the front page under a sensational headline. It ignited a media frenzy. The details, carefully redacted to protect Sarah's full identity, but clear enough to point fingers, painted Dr. Miller in a deeply negative light. Public outrage simmered. Talk shows picked it up. Local news vans camped outside the hospital. Miller's wife, Martha, ever the society matriarch, issued a public statement through her charity organization. She stood by her husband, portraying me as a disgruntled, unstable individual with a vendetta, a man driven by jealousy to ruin a respected doctor's career. The narrative was clear. I was the aggressor, the madman. Amidst the media storm, the hospital announced an internal investigation, a process I knew would be designed to absolve Miller and protect their own interests. It was all a show, a carefully choreographed dance to appease public opinion. The financial strain was immense. My job was gone, and the legal fees were piling up, a crushing weight on our mortgage and savings. Our once comfortable life was now a tightrope walk over an abyss. Sarah, meanwhile, became a pariah at work. Her colleagues, once friendly and respectful, now eyed her with a mix of pity and scorn. Her phone stopped ringing. Her surgeries were reassigned. Her once promising career was in tatters. The ambition that Miller had claimed to understand now a source of deep shame. The stress twisted our already fragile marriage into something unrecognizable. Arguments became bitter recriminations, spoken in hushed tones behind closed doors, or screamed across the silent kitchen. "Look what you've done," she'd whisper, her eyes accusing. "Look what you've cost us." One evening, my phone rang. It was Scott Jenkins. "Mike," he said, his voice low, "I saw the news. Listen, I told you Miller had a reputation. There are others. I've been doing some digging, quietly. Old HR files, hush transfers. It's not just Connie. He's done this before. I'll help where I can, discreetly." A small glimmer of hope, a faint light in the encroaching darkness. Unemployed, isolated, and with my reputation in tatters, I felt the walls closing in. The suspension from my law firm had effectively ended my career. My former colleagues, once friendly, now avoided my calls, their silence a clear message. The legal community, a tight-knit network, viewed me with a mixture of suspicion and pity. I was the cautionary tale, the man who let personal demons derail his professional life. The strain on my marriage with Sarah became unbearable. Our house, once a home, now felt like a battleground. The shared silence was broken only by the sharp edges of unspoken accusations or the bitter sting of recriminations. We retreated to separate bedrooms, then by unspoken agreement, I moved into a small apartment downtown. The separation, though anticipated, felt like a final crushing blow. Sarah, grappling with her guilt, her complicity, and the destruction of her own promising career, started seeing a therapist. She'd come by the apartment occasionally, her eyes hollow, her movements slow. She was a shadow of the woman I married. I, too, began my own descent. The anger that had fueled my initial actions now mingled with a deep, corrosive despair. I found solace in the bottom of a whiskey glass, the familiar burn a temporary anesthetic to the ache in my chest. Justice, or perhaps just revenge, became my singular focus, a relentless hum in the back of my mind. Dr. Miller, meanwhile, wasn't idle. His connections ran deep. Negative stories about Sarah and me began to surface, subtly placed in local gossip columns and online forums. We were portrayed as opportunists, disgruntled employees seeking to extort a respected public figure. The narrative was expertly crafted, painting us as the villains. The initial media frenzy around the story started to wane. New scandals, new crises, pushed our story from the headlines. The local journalist I had contacted moved on to other investigations. I was left feeling increasingly alone in my fight, the weight of Miller's wealth and power pressing down on me, threatening to crush me. There were nights I stared at the ceiling in my empty apartment, the whiskey warm in my throat, contemplating giving up. What was the point? He was too powerful, too well connected. Then, weeks after our separation, Sarah called. Her voice when she spoke was different, clearer, stronger. She'd been in therapy, she explained, digging into the layers of her guilt and fear. She'd done a lot of thinking, about Miller, about herself. I can't live like this anymore, Mike, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I can't be a victim. Not anymore. The words resonated, a small bell ringing in the darkness of my despair. He twisted everything. He made me feel weak, made me believe I deserved it, or that I was getting something I couldn't get from anyone else. Her voice hitched, but she quickly regained control. I let him, and I hate myself for it. She took a breath. But he can't keep doing this to other women, to anyone. I need to face this, Mike. I need to speak my truth. Not just for you, not just for us, but for myself. And I need to make sure he can't do this to anyone else. Her courage, quiet and unwavering, was like a spark igniting in the ashes of my despair. The whiskey haze began to lift. My motivation, once purely for revenge against Miller, shifted, transformed into something else. It became a shared pursuit of justice, a common cause with the woman I had once loved, and perhaps, in a hidden corner of my heart, still did. We were both damaged, broken in different ways, but perhaps together we could still stand. Sarah's newfound courage was a fragile thing, but it was real. With my support, she filed a formal complaint against Miller. It wasn't just about the affair, it detailed the insidious emotional manipulation, the abuse of power, the calculated psychological games he'd played. The hospital, already under renewed public scrutiny from the initial media storm, found itself unable to dismiss it as easily this time. The board, sensitive to optics, had to at least appear to take it seriously. Miller's legal team, however, was far from done. Their intimidation tactics ramped up. They threatened to expose every past mistake Sarah had ever made, every inconsistency in her professional life, every personal vulnerability. They tried to paint her as unstable, vindictive, a scorned woman out for revenge. The most brutal part was the cross-examination. Sarah, seated across from Miller's slick, unblinking attorney, was forced to relive the most humiliating aspects of her affair. Every intimate detail, every whispered word, every moment of weakness was laid bare, dissected in a sterile conference room. She emerged from those sessions pale and shaken, but each time she returned with a fierce, quiet resolve. I was working pro bono now, having connected with a small legal firm dedicated to employee rights. My legal skills, honed over years, were now directed at dismantling Miller's carefully constructed empire. I helped strategize, poring over documents, anticipating their next move. We found other women. Scott's discreet digging had paid off. There was Connie, the nurse practitioner, and a handful of others. Each story was a variation on a theme. Miller's calculated attention, the subtle flattery, the isolation, the eventual abuse of power. But fear was a powerful deterrent. Most of them were too afraid to come forward publicly, terrified of Miller's reach, of the professional ruin they knew he could inflict. Still, Sarah's courage had a ripple effect. One former employee, a medical assistant who had quietly left the hospital years ago, reached out. Inspired by Sarah's public stance, she agreed to provide an anonymous affidavit detailing similar manipulative behavior, though her story hadn't escalated to a physical affair. It was a small crack in Miller's armor, but a significant one. Miller, sensing the walls closing in, made a play. His attorney offered Sarah a substantial severance package, a generous sum of money, in exchange for dropping the complaint and signing a non-disclosure agreement. It was a bribe, pure and simple, a desperate attempt to silence her. Sarah refused without hesitation. "It's not about the money," she told me later, her voice firm. "It's about stopping him." The pressure on Miller increased. More whispers surfaced. Scott, still a source inside the hospital, found small pieces of information. Unusual expense reports, peculiar scheduling requests. The pattern became undeniable. Then, an unexpected development. Martha Miller, Dr. Miller's wife, a woman of formidable reputation in her own right, had started her own quiet investigation. She had always projected an image of unwavering support for her husband, but the public scandal had clearly opened her eyes. She began to find discrepancies in his finances, unexplained absences in his schedule, a parallel life he had meticulously hidden. She didn't contact us, but the information she was gathering, shared discreetly with her own attorney, was reaching the hospital board. The board, now truly fearing a major scandal, began to distance itself from Miller. The internal investigation that had been a whitewash was suddenly given new teeth. They couldn't afford a public trial, a prolonged media circus, that would expose the rot within their institution. Mike and Sarah, though still living separately, found a fragile camaraderie in their shared fight.